All right, well, we'll try starting. Warm welcome to everybody to the first 2016 meeting of the City Deal Board. This room isn't the best for sound, so I will ask all the people speaking in front of microphones to speak reasonably close. Can people hear me for a start? Is that working? Yeah. We will ensure then everybody can have their say, and also people can hear. But if for any point if someone sticks up their hands, I will partly take that as a sign that there's some mumbling going on, and people might not be able to hear what's being said. So we've got an agenda in front of us, including the feedback from the Joint Assembly that took place just before Christmas. So thank you, Councillor Vick. So first of all, apologies. Any apologies?
Thanks, Chairman. We've done an apology for absence from Councillor Steve Counts. Councillor Ian Bates is here as substitute for Councillor Count today.
Okay, thank you. And we've got in front of us item 2, the minutes of the last meeting on the 3rd of December. Any accuracy issues? No? So I can take the minutes as agreed. Thank you. Any declarations of interest on the items on the agenda? No? Right. Well, if we can move on to public questions. We've got, I think, 10 questions. So we've grouped them so that we can effectively cover the issues in a sequence. So first of all, we've got questions about Milton Road and Histon Road, and then about the call for evidence, which is an item on the agenda, and then three speakers about cycling. So what I may do, if it's okay with the questioners, if Dorcas and Barbara could ask their questions, we would just answer the questions at the same time, if that's okay, because there's some links between them, and similarly on questions 3 and 4. But we'll make sure that we answer each of the questions that are there. You're very welcome to read them out, or if you chose to, we could just answer the question as written on the paper. So first, if I could ask Dorcas Fowler. Thanks, Dorcas. So if you just sit in the front there and press the button, and the microphone should light up.
Okay. Can everybody hear me?
We can. Thank you, Dorcas.
Okay. I'm Dorcas Fowler. I'm a resident of Cambridge for 40 years and Milton Road for over 25. So I feel I have some information. My question really is, that I've got here, and I think you've seen it before, is that these ideas, which are ideas and not plans or proposals, which have been put forward for Milton Road and Histon Road, are premised on the assumption that large numbers of people in the new developments to the north, such as Waterbeach, will be adding to peak traffic. What evidence is there of growth of jobs in the city centre as opposed to periphery, such as the Addenbrooke site? That's my question.
Thank you. I think we'll take that now if we can. So if we could ask Graham Hughes to respond in terms of the issues you raised about Waterbeach and jobs growth.
Thank you, Chairman. I think probably in opening on that question, I'd say the Milton Road, indeed the other proposals, are not premised just on the point you've made. It's actually on growth in the area generally, in the Greater Cambridge area and indeed beyond. Many of those people are coming into Cambridge for a variety of purposes, not just work, but leisure and other activities as well. And it's also premised on the fact that there is significant congestion within Cambridge and on the key radial routes already. So there are a variety of things there which are driving the need to improve access into Cambridge, and particularly improve access into Cambridge by means other than the car. But then specifically on the point you make about evidence, there is a significant amount of new employment land that's allocated and intensification that's already taken place, so allocated in the local plans. Some of that's on the periphery, but that doesn't necessarily mean people could always go round. Sometimes people need to go through the city to get to those locations. The other thing I'd say, Chairman, is there's also a significant amount of intensification of existing land uses, which is creating more employment. So, particular examples of that would be the CB1 area, where there were employment uses there, but significant extra employment was being created on the same land, on the station. Sorry, I apologise, yes, around the station. So, for all of those reasons, we believe that there is going to be continual growth, and all of our modelling suggests that that's the case. That there's an existing problem, and so we need to deal with all of those issues. And on that basis, we put forward proposals in the city law package.
Okay, thank you. And second, Barbara Taylor, also on Milton and Liston roads. Barbara?
Yes.
It will bang down.
I'm a resident of Milton Road, a homeowner and a taxpayer, and I've lived on Milton Road for over 30 years. This is my question. The proposals for structural changes to Milton and Histon roads are based on an initial technical study by the external consultants, the WSP Group. They will have been given a brief when they were commissioned by the Greater Cambridge City Deal. When and where will that brief be published?
Mr. Dewsgate.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, very simple answer to this. There's no problem in sharing that brief at all, and we'll post it up on the website and make it available as soon as we can.
So it's not available now?
It's just not on the website. We haven't put it on there because we've actually published all of the details, but there's no problem in publishing it at all, and we'll do that.
Right. And when will that be?
As I say, as soon as possible. I mean, I'll seek to get it up next week. We just need to make sure that it can be
Next week, okay.
And if you want to leave your email address, we could make sure that it's emailed to you as well.
Right. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
All right. Thanks, Mrs. Taylor. And then third, Lynn Hyatt. Thank you, Lynn.
Hello again. Thank you. It's been emphasised throughout this process and in the government's official guidance on transport modelling and appraisal, WebTag, that proposals for transport infrastructure must be evidence-based. Given that the proposals for Milton Road, Histon Road, and in an earlier consultation, the A428 corridor, have at their centre the introduction of separate bus-only lanes, residents are asking for the evidence that these are necessary and will work, given all the damaging consequences of these expensive measures. I feel sure that the Cambridge City Deal must have this evidence, including examples from the UK and elsewhere, where bus-only lanes have been successful. When and where will this evidence be published, please?
Thank you. Graham Hughes.
Chairman, I think I've answered this question in a variety of ways by mentioning the busway as our sort of key local example. So there is plenty of evidence from around the world that significant change, and particularly around high quality services, whether it be bus-based or indeed rail-based, if you improve the quality of the services, reliability, frequency, and so on, you can get significant increases in patronage and usage at a local level. The best example that we will point to, and it I think very much bears our point out, which is that when the busway was introduced, which is provided certainly to the edge of Cambridge, direct transport by bus, started off at frequencies about every 10 to 12 minutes, now every 5 or so minutes. We've seen very, very dramatic growth in patronage. We've seen significant numbers of people using that service that were not previously using bus services, and currently have about 3.6 million people using that per year. So at a very local level, there is very, very clear evidence that if you provide a shift or a step change in the quality of public transport provision, then you do get a very, very significant increase in usage. But there are other examples from around the world, and it's you use appropriate technologies for the area. But what we're talking about here, and the key point to make, is in all of the schemes we're talking about very high quality provision. Whichever options are eventually chosen, very high quality provision that will make that step change of the nature, if you like, not necessarily the form, but of the nature that we've seen on the busway that gives confidence to people using those services in terms of reliability and so on, and therefore increases the use. So I think there is plenty of evidence that justifies the need for significant improvements of whatever form they take.
Councillor Bates just wanted to add a point, Ms. Hyde.
Thank you. Perhaps I'm a good example. I did not use the bus to come into Cambridge before the busway was open. I now regularly using the bus way from St Ives Park and ride along with my wife, and frequently stand there, and the bus is often full by the time it gets to St Ives and that before it gets to Cambridge. So I am perhaps an example of changing my habits from using the car on the A14 to using the busway. I only give you that as an example because I have changed, or we have changed our pattern of transport.
Just on the detail, I mean, I think what I will look to do with the officers is to see what evidence we have on in terms of both busway and on bus lanes, and put that as a publication as part of the website. Well, not now. I think we'll just publish it.
Well, this is actually
Yeah.
published document.
Yeah. So I think if we publish what we've got, and then obviously that can then be scrutinised by people. Okay. Thanks. And fourth on the Milton and Histon Road is Michael Page. Thanks, Mike.
Yes, good afternoon. Press the button. Can you hear me? Good. My question relates to the consultation process and the process for arriving at the proposals that residents have been shown, particularly at Milton Road. On page 74 of the consultant's draft options report concerning Junction 3, which is also known as the Elizabeth Way roundabout, there were 3 options given. Do minimum was to keep the roundabout with some additional road mark. Do something was to keep the roundabout with extra modifications, but it was only their do maximum option which involved removing the roundabout, replacing it with a signal control junction and closing Highworth Avenue to motor traffic. In the document presented for public consultation, we find that the first 2 options are no longer there. The public are being offered no choice. The accompanying questionnaire to the consultation asks, should the initial ideas be considered further? Well, we find this confusing. And in the light of this confusion, we wonder, could you please inform us these 3 things? 1, by what process were the first 2 options proposed by the consultants removed from the document? 2, what evidence, if any, was used in arriving at this decision, and can we please be provided with it? And 3, what steps are you prepared to take to consider the original options, which have a lower impact on the environment and the local community?
Thanks, Mr. Page.
Thank you.
Mr. Hughes.
Thank you, Chairman. I think probably to answer this, we need to disentangle what was actually said to the board and the assembly when these proposals came forward. So I've actually got an extract from what was presented to the board. So essentially 2 options were presented to the board, which were labelled as the do something, the do maximum, the do something and the do maximum. And in the consultant's report, there was a broader range of options, but the point, one of which was do nothing. But the point is, we don't, as a matter of course, consult on a do nothing option. So in the consultant's report, there was a wider range, but essentially in what we presented to the board, as if you like the outline to give us permission to go ahead and prepare the consultation, we had to do something and a do maximum, both of which actually had the closure of the roundabout. So that was essentially the decision that the board took. Since that point, as officers, we have worked with our internal teams and indeed with the consultants to develop the consultation document. And essentially the consultation document that you refer to has a do something and a do maximum option, and both of those options actually if you like, deal with the issue. So we've kind of, we followed it through. So you ask, I'm just looking at your question, what process were the options proposed by the consultants, by what process were they removed. The board essentially agreed the principles on two ends of that spectrum, the do something, the do maximum, and we've actually worked that through into the final consultation document.
May I respond, Mr. Chairman?
If you've got a point, yeah.
Well, the point is that the question hasn't been answered. There wasn't, by the way, Mr. Hughes, a do nothing, it was do minimum.
Do.
Right, correction. But what was the evidence that the officers used in presenting their two options to the board? That's the question.
Experience from officers knowing how that area of the road network operates, and also essentially looking at, because it's a linear scheme, so looking at how the whole scheme, if you like, for a variety of road users actually builds the different elements together. So on the basis of the experience of the officers, we made that recommendation to the board. And again, just to emphasise, the table, Appendix 1 to the board paper, had to do something to do maximum. And both of those options had that issue included. So there was, if you want, like a wider range of issues presented in the consultants' report, but we interpreted that in recommending to the board.
So the evidence was experience.
A significant amount, I'm Chairman through you, a significant amount of what we recommend is based on experience, and we use both consultants and our own technical officers. And so yes, that is a key part of how we make our recommendations.
In the nature of a consultation, we've kind of set out the case, but I would assure you, Mr. Page, that I and I'm sure other members of the board will be looking at the full length of both of those roads that are being consulted on, because in the form of a consultation, it would be overly complicated to assess each of the various permutations in different ways and that are along there. But it's quite clear when you look at a road like Milton Road or Histon Road that we do have to pick into the detail more. So as part of the responses that we get from the consultation, and in our own way looking at the roads during the consultation period, we will have a hard look at what are the impacts both on residents and obviously the displacement risks of traffic and just the access issues. So fundamentally, I think it's a sound consultation because it puts into the public domain the main issues, but along with that, we, as well as residents, will look at the fine detail included in the background reports about each junction. And so just because it says do minimum or do maximum doesn't mean that some of the detail isn't going to get changed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So with item number question 3, then we can in fact look at other possibilities. We can present other possibilities.
And we will listen to obviously all the evidence that people give us back as part of that consultation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So if we can move on to questions on the call for evidence. Daniel Fox.
Afternoon. I'm Gabriel Fox. I'm a parish councillor at Coton Parish Council. In the call for evidence process that was run recently, hopefully you'll have seen comments from Steve Mealy from the University of West of England, and there's a summary in your pack, page 27 and page 28. I was particularly interested to read his comment and advice that the best examples of urban transport solutions have what he described as a wow factor that is largely absent in the UK. I want to draw attention to the proposal known as Bus Rapid Transit, which we presented as a call for evidence. Bus Rapid Transit is described by TRL, which was the Transport Research Laboratory of the Department of Transport, now a private consultancy. They describe Bus Rapid Transit as an innovative and cost-effective approach to high-capacity bus systems. BRT's aim is to provide the same service and speed as an underground rail system, but on the road network. And being a surface subway, as they described it, BRT operates at a fraction of the cost and in a shorter implementation period. There are hundreds of successful BRT installations worldwide, including now more than a dozen in the UK, and several are currently in construction. Probably the largest and most ambitious is the system in Belfast, which is due to open in September 2018. Our proposal, which we very humorously entitled A Streetcar We Desire, has had considerable local interest as we've been discussing it in the city, and the proposal was for a citywide system of customised tram-style buses running on their own dedicated bi-directional centre lane expressways, so bus lanes that run down the centre of roads, exactly like you would see in a tram system, which I'm sure many of us are familiar with. And this would offer a fast, reliable service, in particular with efficient use of Cambridge's limited road space, and that's something that's been used in other historic cities which have limited road space and very limited ability to expand that road space. With smart signalling, smart ticketing and smart Cambridge branding, this is the sort of project that could indeed provide the sort of wow factor that Dr. Melia has suggested. So I'd be interested to know if the board agrees with Dr. Melia on the importance of a wow factor. And then I would like to ask specifically if the board would be prepared to provide some competitive grant funding for one or maybe two projects run locally, maybe by a university department, maybe by a bus company, maybe by private groups or not-for-profit groups, on a competitive, applying for the grant on a competitive basis to assess the viability of a bus rapid transit system for Cambridge.
Thank you, Gabriel. I'll do the easy bit, and I'd just like to welcome your innovative proposal. And I'll just ask if Tanya Sheridan could follow up with a bit more detail.
Okay, so thanks very much. Bus rapid transit is very much part of the transport strategy in the transport strategy for Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire and for the city deal. So thanks for drawing everybody's attention to it. It's not just about bus lanes, it's about high quality public transport, and we would absolutely agree with you that bus rapid transit tends to be the quicker, the cheaper, the better way where you don't already have an existing railway line, generally speaking. And just building on the answer to number 3, I think is Lynn still here? Yes. Hello. A few figures for you on the Cambridgeshire Guided Busway and the case for bus rapid transit. 3.6 million passengers in the year from October 2014 to October 2015, and I think 336,000 passengers in October alone, and there being 13.6 million between opening the busway in August 2011 and the last measurement in October 2015. And you can find that on page 6 of the performance indicator report for the County Council Economy and Environment Committee, which is on the County Council's website. So the aim is to try and have something like bus rapid transit or fast buses in on the radial routes, but we do have to be aware that there are real space constraints and the need to protect other modes, particularly cyclists in the historic centre.
So in terms of the substance of your question, you've asked for whether we consider grant funding. Well, it's a new request, but what we'll do is if we consider it and respond to you in writing on that. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Edward Lee is next.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant.
Hi.
Sorry, just following up on that earlier question, I believe the question was about bus lanes rather than bus ways. I think we were looking, I was looking for evidence for bus lanes within the city.
That was, I hope I covered that in my answer, which is that we will look at what evidence we've got and post that onto our website.
Thank you. I was to talk about the city centre traffic modelling. I've not yet seen anything published on this. So could officers please refer us to any modelling that has been done on future traffic flows on and within the inner ring road? In particular, what modelling has been done on the impact of increasing road capacity on radials with the introduction of new bus lanes? guesstimating the number of bus arrivals in the city at peak times in 2031, I arrive at a figure of between 250 and 300 buses per hour on the 8 major radials. It seems highly unlikely that Drummer Street or any of the connecting streets can accommodate that frequency of bus movements, plus the over 10,000 people an hour that will be disembarking in the city centre. That suggests to me that bus operators will have to use a ring and spoke routing model where most buses circulate the city centre but do not traverse it. That will have two significant advantages over the current hub and spoke routing model. It will make interchanging to any other radial route very simple, obviating the need for an outer orbital bus route as currently being considered. It will make bus services very much more useful to city residents. However, it makes the inner ring road the most critical part of the bus route network. Has this been studied and modelled? It seems to me that the only way in which the inner ring road can flow freely for buses is if the rate of flow of other traffic along radial routes is significantly below peak capacity. That in turn means that what is needed is smart traffic management and inbound flow control, not new bus lanes. Since your rules do not allow me to pose a follow-up question, I will rather impolitely anticipate a response that this modelling work has not yet been done. If that is the case, how does it make sense to commission engineering consultants to propose bus priority schemes on isolated parts of the outer road network before having a clear understanding of the capacity constraints at the centre of the network? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee.
Thank you, Chairman. So quite a number of points in there, Edward, so thank you for those. It's a number of your very insightful questions. In terms of the modelling, there's a huge amount of modelling that we've undertaken and we continue to do it. So we have a model that we use and then periodically update the basic information in there and rerun that model. What you were talking, I was just double checking with Jeremy, who's sitting to my left, who runs or leads on the modelling work. And certainly as part of the LTP, it's Local Transport Plan Development, we did some significant amounts of work around the Ring Road to feed into both City Council and South Cambs District Council local plans. We've modelled the whole of the areas. There is an awful lot of modelling out there. I think what we just need to do is just check what's up on the web, and we can certainly post or links to what is available onto the City Deal website, so we will do that. So there's an awful lot of information out there that's underpinned, if you like, the main transport strategy that's actually led or gone hand in hand with the two district council local plans, and then that modelling is actually being rerun as part of the City Deal process and updated. So I mean, it's always as you'll be aware, a continuous process of updating as things change, but there is a lot of background information. We'll put links on the website as soon as we can to make sure that that's available. I think the more specific point of your question, if I kind of interpret you correctly, when you talk about buses and you talk about 300 buses, and I think actually that's probably not far wrong from the number of buses. There was a piece of work undertaken quite a few years ago by a consultancy called Steer Davis Gleave for the City and City Council and County Council, and I think at the time they were estimating about 200 to 220 per hour in the city, but they were forecasting significant increases, and those increases, a lot of them have come through, not least of all, for example, as a result of the busway. So your numbers are probably not far wrong. I think your point about the criticality of the Ring Road is absolutely right as well, and I think that's consistent with what we've been saying as officers, and I think the Board and Assembly have been debating for quite some time. So if we think about what's happened in Cambridge over the last 10 to 15 years, the core scheme, and that's the closures, the bollard closures, has moved a significant amount of traffic that previously used to drive through the centre onto the Ring Road, because it can't go through the centre now, apart from buses and taxis. And so the Ring Road, as well as the background growth in traffic, has become particularly congested, and it's actually the Ring Road, and various reports to this Board and the Assembly as officers, we've advised that it's the Ring Road that is really the big issue, because junction blocking and so on is then causing a problem for the radial routes, and very, very quickly, if you get just a small incident or indeed just a slightly increased level of traffic, you get gridlock very, very quickly, because the network is operating at that critical level where it doesn't need much change to significantly affect how it operates. So that's all the background. So I think we would agree with you on that. And I think actually, you talk about smart traffic management. I think we would agree that that is a component. However one defines smart traffic management, that is going to be a component of dealing with that issue. We have an element of smart traffic management at the moment through the Scoop system on traffic signals, but that can clearly go further. More signals can be linked and so on. I think probably what I would sort of add, though, to your smart traffic management is that our view is that it does need to solve the problem something more than just smart traffic management, because that won't, in our view, necessarily deal with all of the issues. So I suppose bringing us right up to date, that brings us to the call for evidence and the work that is now going on. So many ideas came forward, including smart traffic management, in that process. And so what we are hoping to do, subject to the decisions later on this agenda, what we're hoping to do is to look at a range of those things and to develop some packages of which smart traffic management may be a key part. But I would go back to your point that I think as officers we're quite clear that because of the way that the city operates, we do need to address the ring road. One of the ways actually of addressing that is stopping the amount of traffic currently coming in to the city from doing so, or discouraging the amount of traffic, and then dealing with the whole system. So it does need a system-wide approach, but I wouldn't disagree with a lot of what you've said. Maybe the sort of solutions that eventually come up may be slightly different, but a lot of the basic information is correct, and I would agree with you.
Just speaking for the board, and I think I speak for them, a chunk of our analysis of the call for evidence and of the issues that the officers have raised, and also that you raised, Mr. Lee, is that I think there's a fair amount of agreement about a number of the threads. It's just that our view, put simply, is that we believe that both addressing the radials and the citywide interventions has to be done. And so I think we'll come on to it later in the agenda briefly, but it's right that the board brings forward more analysis of how a range of citywide interventions would work that can be implemented relatively quickly rather than at considerable impact and thereby taking longer, and that is seen as in the context of combining that with the interventions on the radial roads. And it's that work, I think, will also involve traffic modelling, which can be challenged or not, and will link to the evidence where you and probably we disagree, and that's over whether or not bus lanes are part of the solution. But there's a lot of important threads in what you put forward, and I think that the board will evidence, along with what we bring forward for the Assembly to consider this year, that we do need to intervene in ways that reduce the amount of cars, and we need to free up that inner ring road, so particularly at congested periods, it's a place for buses and cycles and not for cars and lorries. Thank you. The next question is from Robin Helly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As you have already heard this afternoon, there is a growing sense of unease amongst the public that the engineering projects associated with the creation of new bus lanes are being designed for narrowly defined functional efficiency, and they lack an adequate consideration of their social and environmental impacts on the public realm and on local communities. As such, these proposals cannot be regarded as sustainable development as defined in the National Planning Policy Framework. Cambridge PPF urges the board to accept as rapidly as possible the recommendation from its Assembly for the rapid production of an environmental design guide for transport schemes that incorporates both social and environmental issues. Second point I would make is that we are becoming increasingly concerned about the manifest disconnect between the various infrastructure engineering projects and the search for an appropriate demand management scheme to alleviate congestion across the whole city. We simply don't know whether there will be a need for the scale of heavy engineering proposed for the Milton and Histon roads once an effective demand management measures are in place. Common sense ought to dictate that these two strands, engineering and demand management, proceed hand in hand to produce a fully integrated solution. The reassurance that the consultant's review of the core for evidence will in some mysterious way be woven into these engineering projects at some future date is a manifestation of bad planning. We appreciate that the consultations on the radial routes have already been launched. However, in the light of these arguments, we ask, will the City deal defer further progress on these projects so that a more balanced and fully integrated approach between demand management and infrastructure engineering can be produced that incorporates the proposed social and environmental design guidelines? And if I may have a follow-up, assuming that your answer is no, there is no deferral, can I then, as a follow-up, ask the question, why not?
Well, it's the same question, but so we'll answer it in one go. Mr. Hughes first.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the fundamental point that we would make here is that whatever eventually comes out of the process that's been started through the core for evidence, and I'll just point out that the plan is to bring that back to this group in the summer, which is well before any final decisions are taken on any of the grading schemes, even the Milton Road 4 to 8. I'll speak up, apologies for those people at the back. If that comes, as it will come to this group in the summer of this year, that is well before any final decisions on the A428, which is the first of the consultations, are taken. So you talk about how it will be mysteriously woven in. It will actually be quite early in the process that the board is being asked to take a clearer view on, if you like, the congestion management strategy. So those things can come together, and I think I've been consistent in making that point in response to questions here, that they're not misaligned. We're on a tight timescale with the city deals. We need to get on and do things, but we do need to do things properly. And so we're confident that by doing them in the order we do them, that is not misaligning, and we will bring them together as necessary. So that answers one of the points. I think the other point that I would make very clear, the view that we have, is that significant improvements are needed to the bus infrastructure, principally on the radial routes. And it comes back to Edward Lee's previous question, but particularly on the radial routes, we need significant improvements to bus infrastructure to get very large numbers of people currently living in the area surrounding Cambridge, and indeed the significant numbers of additional people who will be moving in the years to come into Cambridge in a way that doesn't cause the problems that we see at the moment. So our view is that, yes, we're absolutely clear some sort of congestion management arrangement within Cambridge is necessary, but whatever form that takes, much better facilities for buses, particularly for cyclists as well, to come into Cambridge are also needed. So in that sense, we're not pursuing one option, thinking that we may have to move away from that option at a later stage. What we're doing is developing the schemes as quickly as we can, and then we will bring that together in terms of the final designs and amending those if necessary, bringing it together when we have a greater clarity on the congestion management issues. But those timescales are coming together, and it's not going to be very long. Again, referring to the paper later on today's agenda, it's not going to be very long until those things can come together. So I think we are clear that whatever happens, Chairman, we need both of those elements, and that's actually the strategy that was set down in the City deal when we initially pitched it to government, and it's, I think, consistently been the strategy of the City deal from that point onwards.
Can I make a constructive comment as feedback? I think it would be highly desirable if the City Deal Board was to produce a statement to the effect that no irrevocable decisions about investment of money on heavy engineering are going to be made until such time as demand management mechanisms measures across the city have been agreed. At the moment, we simply do not know what scale of investment is needed, if at all, if demand management from other mechanisms works. And to rush ahead with one strand until the other one is fully developed is irresponsible. And I think it would be very good if the City Deal could give the reassurance to the public that it is not irrevocably committed to one strand, and it is prepared to actually look in a more broader way at a more balanced package, of which engineering may well play a role, but is not the sole component. Thank you.
What I will say, and it comes from the call for evidence, it also comes from the Assembly's issues on environmental design, and also from our own reflections on what are the options that we see as being part of the citywide package, is that we would anticipate a strong package coming forward in the summer. It's, as I mentioned earlier in the meeting, it would be based on interventions in the city to tackle demand, i.e. the number of cars coming in, particularly at the peaks, that we believe we can deliver within the next 1 to 3 years, rather than more complicated projects. So we will bring that forward in June. It will be subject to debate. There will also be further work following the call for evidence, because there's a number of issues out of that in terms of options that would take more work. So we don't agree that we're doing one before the other. We can answer your question and say there won't be any decisions made before those two are combined. Thank you. Right, and finally we've got a series of questions on cycling. So if first I could ask Mal Schofield to ask question 8. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Could I just, you have my questions in front of you,
Yeah.
Could I just say, really from what I've heard so far, that there is this very strange logic that goes from patronage on guided busways to patronage on bus lanes. I don't accept that. I don't accept. We're talking about two fundamentally different products. If there were cars, they would be fundamentally different in their characteristics and their attractiveness. So that having been said, this is my third question to you in 6 months. Each question that I've asked has been forensic, and it's been taken from your comments in your minutes. No more than that. It's not an invention on my part to bear. In this case, it is a point that was made in the draft minutes of Thursday the 3rd of December, and it concerned Western Orbital. Now, Western Orbital sounds grand, but I do appreciate that it really is just two slipways. It's no more, no less than that, as I understand it. But nevertheless, the comment that's there is as follows. A study of home addresses at commuters to the biomedical campus has been carried out by employers, showing a concentration in the CB23 and CB24 postcodes. CB23 is roughly to the west and around Papworth. CB24, it's a very strange choice, but CB24 sits alongside the guided busway. The results of this study, it says, would be shared by officers. Now, what I would say is, what are the statistics and the fuller context of this commentary? That is, getting the detail, the explicit rather than the implicit. And is it not more urgent now to support the alternative mode of travel as described below by the biomedical campus, which is, here we have 24,000 people in 2024 who are going to be working on a campus whose focus and priority is health, and yet we are somehow devaluing the whole concept of healthy travel, and we seem to be preoccupied with static, passive bus travel. That's not even going into the difficulty that you're going to have in terms of converting the stubborn car driver onto the bus. So I'm not going to say any more than that here. You've got the rest in front of you, other than to say that I actually have got, with the help of the consultants and with the help of AstraZeneca, I've got those statistics. And taking the forward view and taking the positive view, let me just say to you that in my calculation, I've made 12 assumptions, I'll give you those. In my calculation, the switch actually from car to bus is no more than as a percentage 0.0034.
Okay.
0.0034. It's not 20% or 25%. It's minimal. It's minimal. And I just don't understand how we're in this investment fixation, really, which is around bus lanes, as has already been stated, and not actually just thinking quite seriously about traffic, congestion, and improving cycling. And that's why I think you've probably put me at the head of this particular group. Thank you.
Now, I appreciate your question covered other issues, but it was in the core of it. We were obviously focusing there, Mal, on cycling. Mr. Hughes, have you got any? Can you respond in terms of the points that are in the analysis on the biomedical campus?
Chairman, I'm not entirely sure what specific points. I mean, I've listened to Mal, and I mean, Mal and I talked quite a lot. Maybe not so much recently, we had talked a lot in the past. I mean, I understood, I mean, the point you were making was about healthy travel and cycling and so on, and you've seen the statistics. I think the initial question that was raised in the written paper was around where did that information come from, and I think from what you say, you've now gathered that, so it was...
Sorry, it's much more that it's challenging the implicit assumption that a Western orbital strengthens the case which is arising from these statistics. The premise is that there's a significant number of people who would live in CB23 and CB24 and work on the biocampus site and would opt to take the bus rather than use their car.
I mean, I think, and Jeremy, you may have some more detailed points to add in a second, but I think the Western orbital work is at a very, very early stage at the moment in terms of developing the proposals. And so, I mean, I think, again, you're basing it on the particular the Biomed campus work and the people who are going to that site. I mean, actually, a point I was going to make in terms of one of the earlier questions, I remember Gabriel Fox, but I mean, another one of the key elements of the City Deal package is around orbital capacity, because then that allows people to distribute right the way around the city without, in terms of buses going into the city centre. So I think, unless Jeremy, you've got any more specific numbers to add. I mean, I'd be happy, me and Jeremy would be very happy to talk outside of here about the specifics of the work you've done. But I think, on the Western orbital, we are still at a very early stage, and all of these schemes, as I think the board knows, all of these schemes have to develop, or they have to develop for a viable business case before the board can make any decisions to invest in them. And that business case will involve sufficient users if we're talking about bus lanes to justify the cost. So there is an absolute point in there that we have to demonstrate that the bus lanes are going to be used and they're justifiable, and so we would be working on that. So all I would say is there is still a lot of work to do on particularly the Western Orbital because it's very early in its development phases. Certainly happy to look at your numbers. We will be developing the case, and if at the end of the day there is no business case to do it, then it's not something we can invest in. I mean, I think we believe that given where all the growth is going to take place, both employment and housing, we do believe that there is a case to allow traffic to distribute much more effectively around the edge of the city, but we would need to demonstrate that as the scheme comes forward. And if your numbers help us to either think that is the case or isn't the case, then we'd be very happy to work through with you. So maybe we can talk outside of here about that.
So they're not my Chair, they're not my numbers, they're the biomedical campus's numbers rather than my own. What I will do is I'll leave that with you, and then perhaps we can sort of discuss it separately.
So when the board, along with the Assembly, looked at the priorities for the first year, we, and I remember Councillor Manning made a big point of it, we realised that we hadn't given enough focus on the biomedical campus. Now, that then splits into several projects, but one of the projects that we're about to publish is the outline proposals for the Western Orbital. So there'll be obviously a dialogue through that. There's also going to be a study of the A1307 come through, and as part of that, I'm confident that we would obviously be looking hard at some of these other group, basically where is the distribution as expected already of employees coming into the biomedical campus, and there may well be some interventions and different options to assist their transport. I don't know if you had anything else, Jeremy, but you seem to be interested in adding.
I'll just add a couple of points, Chair.
Yeah.
I mean, firstly, it was, of course, AstraZeneca who commissioned this work on behalf of, well, mainly themselves, but actually covering all of the current employers at the biomedical campus. And the results are fascinating in terms of what they show about a site that is really maximising its current access by pedestrians, by cyclists and by public transport. The noticeable thing about the public transport figures for the biomedical campus is where there are good bus services going into the campus, they're well used, and funnily enough, where there aren't good services going into the campus, there's virtually no use. In the context of the CB23 postcode, there are of course significant numbers of new houses planned for the Camborne area, but also the Papworth Hospital will be moving to the Addenbrooke site in the next year or two, and all of their staff, many of whom currently live in the Papworth area, will be seeking to get to the campus. At the moment, there is no realistic, or rather, there is no reliable and timely public transport service that will get them there. And whether it is by physical means or whether it is simply by provision of a service, it is fair to say that the employers on the campus are very keen to see such a link provided. I think the other thing I would just say is that the health service have always been very clear to us as local authorities that while yes, they do like to see a lot of people using active modes of transport, on average, people who use public transport are generally getting more exercise and are fitter and healthier than those in their cars. And one of the reasons for that in terms of actual air quality is air quality in a vehicle tends to be far worse, or in a car stuck in traffic tends to be far worse than air quality for somebody who's just walking along or moving on a bus or a train.
So I hope that that small element of also depth of analysis now evidences that we do want to work with employers on the biomedical campus in Addenbrooke. We recognise that the challenges of our city and transport aren't solely about the centre, and we have to combine quite a lot of analysis and also options including your suggestions about park and cycle to get to the right answers for the 20,000 plus employees. Okay.
Thank you very much for your time. I did anticipate that the Papworth comment,
The
by the way,
extra.
and that's in my notes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councillor Susan van der Ven. Thank you.
Right. Just for the benefit of my co-questioners, I come from the south of the district of South Cambridgeshire, representing the Melbourne area, and we're trying to do our bit for reducing vehicle traffic. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I wanted to update the board on efforts to realise a Cambridge to Royston A10 cycle link. This is a corridor that feeds into 3 key employment centres, Cambridge, Melbourne and Royston, all of which draw a workforce from Cambridge and South Cambs. While the A10 scheme lost out on City Deal Tranche 1 funding, as you know, it has overwhelming support from all 11 Cambridge Biomedical Campus partners and over 100 A10 businesses, as I presented to you last year. I'm pleased to say that since then, much progress has been made. The northern half of the route has won funding from the Department for Transport Cycling Ambition Grant. The core cycle link between Harston and Foxton was completed just a few weeks ago with minimum disruption and work completed in the space of about 12 weeks, far ahead of schedule. even in the dead of winter, this has been described as transformative for people who are finding cycling to Cambridge much quicker than driving. Indeed, on the A10 road that sits alongside the new cycle path, drivers are now experiencing a delay of 25 minutes at peak time due to frequent closures at Foxton Level Crossing. By contrast, the same journey on the new path takes 5 minutes, and cycles can get through the crossing barrier openings without repeated queuing. However, the southern half of the corridor that includes Melbourne and Royston is without funding. As a business cluster in its own right, thousands of employees travel to work at the likes of AstraZeneca, Johnson Matthey and TTP, who are represented here in the audience today. There are two components that need funding. One is a bridge over the A515 roundabout near Royston, over the border. Hertfordshire County Council, spurred on by the vision of a Royston to Cambridge cycle network, have just completed their feasibility study with a conclusive costed option for a bridge. The Cambridgeshire and Peterborough LEP, which includes Royston, is keen to help find a funding solution for that. The second component is the cycle link in and out of Melbourne, consisting of about 2 miles and entirely on County Highways owned land. Detailed work has already been done in anticipation of City Deal Tranche 1. The section joining the A10 to Melbourne Science Park has been costed at just 300k. The other section to Royston is so dangerous that when Councillor Kavanagh, the cycling champion for the county, when he cycled down from Cambridge to see it firsthand, we decided we shouldn't risk it. To demonstrate people's willingness to put their hands into their own pockets, the A10 Corridor Cycling Campaign organised fundraising for a community contribution toward the missing Royston to Melbourne link. Together with residents and other councillors, last month Councillor Kavanagh and I took our lives in our hands and negotiated the most dangerous stretch dressed in Santa outfits. Our target was £1,000. We had 72 individual donations and we raised over £1,500, including a sponsorship from Councillor Manning, for which many thanks. Employees at several local businesses are now planning more fundraising, and AstraZeneca in Melbourne will also be organising confidence-building cycle demonstrations and rides for new cyclists, because even at Melbourne Science Park they have run out of parking places. We have seen how quickly A10 cycle links can be delivered and how instantly transformative a mile or two link can be for people needing to get to work. So I would urge you please to keep in mind the relatively small amount of funding needed to complete the scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Part of our approach, it may not have been in the spirit of Christmas, was that we thought that some others would come to the party in funding, particularly the links nearer the city. I don't know if you've got anything to add, Mr. Hughes, on cycle funding on the A10?
Chairman, it's clearly an issue for the board to consider in terms of long-term arrangements. So there's nothing in the current programme to extend.
Well, we come to a review at each year about what we've spent and what we're targeting, and obviously part of that is to see what we're spending on cycling within it. Mr. Bridge.
I think, Chairman, in the light of what we've heard, I'd like to just take this back to the local enterprise partnership to actually look at it as a separate issue, because clearly we have a problem in relation to the monies that we need in the city deal and where that applies to. But clearly we're looking at other interventions from the local enterprise partnership, and I'll take that back there and look and see what help we can provide indeed along that corridor.
Thank you.
And that would certainly help at the Royston end.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, well thank you, Councillor. And last but not least, Robin Hayden from the Cambridge Cycling Campaign. Robin.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And if possible, could you spell my name correctly next time?
Yeah, I've noticed that, and we will.
Okay, thank you very much. Between 2001 and 2011, in Greater Cambridge, the number of people driving to work increased by 6.9%. The number of people cycling to work increased by 34%. The numbers for residents of Cambridge is even more dramatic. an almost 36% increase in the number of people cycling to work, with a decrease of 2.5% in the number of people driving to work. These increases must be considered in the context of the working population increasing by over 10,000 people. If these population increases are extrapolated out to 2031, then the number of people cycling to work in Greater Cambridge could be almost 42,000 people, compared with 75,000 people driving to work, without considering the available space that is not available for cars to drive around. Cambridge Cycling Campaign believes that the only way to enable those 38% of people to cycle to work in 2031, reducing the pressure on the roads is to provide world-class bicycle infrastructure. We would like to ask the Executive Board to recognise the valuable contribution that cycling makes to Greater Cambridge, to the productivity of businesses, to the health of the population, and reducing congestion in the region. We estimate that by 2031, an additional 24,000 people will be cycling to work, and we must build the bicycle infrastructure that can support such high traffic flows of people on bicycles. We would therefore also like to ask the Executive Board to make a clear commitment that world-class bicycle infrastructure must be included in all City Deal infrastructure projects.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure where my superlatives end or begin, but I think what we will commit to is higher standard bicycle infrastructure. What is world class, I'm not akin to be able to define, but I would hope that evidenced by the investment that's been authorised so far, but in the fact that it's a central part of whichever part of the city we look at in a more holistic way, that we will be able to evidence it. But we obviously appreciate the expertise that your organisation inputs into the dialogue and the pressure if we didn't get it right that would be exerted. I don't know if officers, obviously officers will also take the quality of each element of the bicycling element of each scheme at this level.
Thank you, Chairman. Just two things I'd say, just in addition to that. I absolutely agree with what the Chairman said. I think the first thing is that there is already a significant amount of investment within the City Deal package going into cycling, and so I appreciate you may not think that that's enough, but there is a lot of work going on. So particularly the Chisholm Trail, which is allocated about £10 million, and when we can bring that forward, that will be I don't like the term, but a real game changer, linking the science-based employment land in the north with Barnet campus in the south. As part of that, but separately, County Council is currently moving forward with the Chesterton Bridge over the river, which will link, if you like, the two parts of the Chisholm Trail, and there are a variety of other things going on. So there's an awful lot of investment currently going on into cycling, and I think that is a large part, not all, I would agree, a large part of the increase in numbers that you talked about, that is actually driving the better infrastructure that we're getting. I think the other thing that I'd say, Chairman, is just building on what you said, and that is that as a matter of course, in all of the schemes that the big schemes that we now deliver, so 428, Histon Road, Milton Road, and then the other schemes that come on through the City Deal, as a matter of course, all of those will have high quality walking and cycling built into them. Now, whether that is what would, as you say, Chairman, be determined as world class, and on all of these things you have to have a balance between the different modes of transport. But I would like to think that we've all moved a long way from the past, where maybe cycling and walking was a bit of an afterthought of these schemes, to where cycling and walking is where we intend to be, is absolutely centrepiece to any of these corridor schemes, and we do build much better facilities for all of the users when we deliver them. So I think you can be confident that there will be some better on all of these key routes.
Mr. Hagan?
So we have heard through the grapevine that when proposing different traffic signal phasing, for example, on some junctions, the phrase, we can't do that because the volume of traffic wouldn't allow it. But that volume of traffic is only car traffic, and it doesn't take into account cycle traffic. We've seen no reports of any of these things on how many people are cycling along Milton Road, how many people are driving along Milton Road is always shown. So world-class bicycle infrastructure starts from the data. So we would absolutely implore people to include the data for all modes of transport along these corridors.
Combined
Yeah,
response.
I would agree with that, and we do. But as I say, in bringing schemes forward, there always has to be a balance. And I would hope that we don't say, oh, you can't possibly do that because it's going to be difficult for the car drivers. But we do have to think about the car drivers as well as the bus users, as well as the cyclists, as well as the pedestrians. And so, again,
and how will that be addressed in the signalling of significant new junctions?
In terms of the final design, those things will need to be taken into account, and there are examples across the city where we have remodelled junctions recently to improve conditions for different road users, and in some instances they have taken capacity away from car use and provided better facilities for pedestrians and cyclists. So all of those things need to come in, and signal timings can be changed over time. It's linked to how you design the junction. I think I would make the point, though, if we are particularly on the junctions in the areas where we have limited space, it has to be a balance between all of those. And at the moment, we're not seeking to stop cars coming in completely. We are seeking to provide better facilities for cyclists, pedestrians, particularly bus users as well. But we do need to maintain access for the car driver. So it's that balance. And again, I've said it before, but I'd like to think we work creatively and constructively with the cycle campaign. If there are specific issues, we like to work with you early on in the schemes. If there are specific issues that you can bring to us, we can't always say that we will agree with you on everything and do everything you want. But we do, I think, generally benefit from the experience you bring, and we can bring that into the overall balance and deliver a better outcome. So
we will respond if there are issues where, in the process of designing better arrangements to reduce the reliance on cars in this city, if there are elements that don't work, you raise them with us, we'll meet and discuss them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our questioners, and I hope that in discussing the main item on the agenda, the report back from the Assembly on the call for evidence, that we will further address some of the points that have been made in the hour that we've been listening to and responding to issues. So if we can move on to item 5, and if Councillor Bick, you want to say something now, and then we'll, I think we're almost going straight into item 6. So if there's anything you want to say now, obviously we've got both the discussion on the call for evidence and also the environmental design part, and then we'll also, I think once you've said a few words, we'll go straight to Glenn Richardson to give us a slightly shorter version of the presentation that was arranged for you, given that we share the commitment to come up with some an environmental guide in terms of the design, which will set some principles for the way that we work up further radial and other designs in the city. Councillor Bick.
Thanks, Chair. I was proposing just to speak to the first half of my report, which is number 1 and 2A, and then, if with your permission, to come back at the beginning of your discussion on the call for evidence to talk about that part of the report. In general terms, we had one question which didn't focus particularly on an individual item on our agenda or yours, from Edward Lee, about the engagement and cooperation between the City Deal and the Highways England organisation and Network Rail. We understood from officers that there was a high level of coordination and engagement going on, but that the remits of these bodies, these other bodies, require them to build their business case on broader dynamics, not least because they're either national or regional, and so we are needing to accept that we are liaising with them in an environment of other factors that we don't control. But we did ask for, and the officers agreed to provide, a sort of engagement map which helps which would help us, and I suspect could be circulated more widely, understand what is the nature of that engagement today, on what issues are we pressing those other organisations, we understand that engagement isn't wholly unsuccessful. In fact, it's quite successful in certain respects, it would be good that people had the transparency about what our agenda was with them, so that was something that officers are going to provide to us.
Yep. And I think, just taking up that point, as in the discussions on devolution and as in discussions with also the two MPs for Cambridge, partly because to some extent we have no direct relationship or direct influence on both of those two organisations, then there are issues that we need to, if you like, put a different form of pressure to be able to achieve things. So, for instance, we're meeting with Network Rail on Tuesday about East-West Rail and a number of other issues. So, yes, there are meetings taking place, and I know from the in-depth process for the A14 that similarly on specific issues there's a lot of work and a lot of dialogue. But I think our aspiration is to be treated as partners by these organisations, and there's still some way to go, I think.
But then continuing, the item that we had on our agenda about opportunities for public realm and green landscaping in Hartlepool within the City Deal delivery. This was a presentation that we had asked for from experts in that field, I think I'm not going to try and summarise it for you because you're going to have a version of that from Glenn Richardson now, but just to say that I think members of the Assembly felt that this was a very positive contribution to the debate about the current radial schemes that are being advanced through the processes, and that it should be more widely available, not only to yourselves on the board, but also to members of the public, and at suitable opportunities, including public meetings. It would seem to me that it would add quite a different complexion, I think, to some of the issues from the way that they're presented in the current consultation materials. So just assuming you're going to do that next, yep. I will just move on and talk about the questions we received on this, relating to this item, from Mike Sargent, Wendy Blythe and Nicola Harrison. Each in different ways was expressing to us disappointment at the apparent absence of environmental considerations as a priority within the schemes that were being advanced for Milton Road, Histon Road and the A428 corridor. A suggestion from these questions arose that the City Deal should adopt a design guide which would focus on defining the environmental and design aspirations we would expect to have in relation to these infrastructure schemes, which could be adopted as a policy and a tool of the City Deal going forward, not just for schemes we have on the table now, but for the future as well, and could not only ensure those considerations were sort of central to the way we dealt with environmental and design considerations, but they also gave the public the confidence that that was the case. And so you will see that we agreed that officers would bring forward some more information on what an environmental design guide would involve. But I would say to you, given the advancing of these different proposals, the sooner the better if we're going to do it, because otherwise we could spend some time, I never get the expression right, shutting the door after the horse has bolted. And so it would be great if the board could, even this afternoon, could agree to agree to further work on an environmental and design guide, in the way that I've described. So those, that's what we talked about.
And thanks to the Assembly for taking the initiative. I mean, I think high quality design was always implicit, but I think as with going through the issues that Mr. Richardson is going to share with the board, we are happy to make it explicit. So, Mr. Richardson, if you could just give us a potted version of the longer presentation that you gave to the Assembly. Thank you.
I will do so, Chair, and good afternoon, members of the board.
Can people see a screen?
There should be a screen on in the back room, excellent. Thank you very much, and I will keep it brief, Chair, and give you all time for questions. This is a shorter presentation of the one I gave for Christmas with Andrew Crammond of WSP, working on these schemes together with partners. We've called it Opportunities for Public Realm and Green Landscaping Enhancement Within City Delivery. And we've added this cheeky slide here, or making great streets. And that's me, Urban Design Conservation Manager at the City Council, but very much working across the districts together with the County Council. I just want to embed this notion, Chair, of the persistent street. And by that, streets are time-tested way of connecting ourselves to others and places and work and so on and so forth. And I think what's interesting, if you just look at Cambridge, and I've added a few extra slides to those from the presentation with Andrew Cameron, but in terms of Cambridge, indeed this predates, of course, medieval Cambridge, Via Devana, which indeed is a Roman road. And if you think about 2,000 plus years of history, and of course this has become Hills Road, Huntington Road, etc., and indeed survived straight into Victorian times, and indeed does today. So we have to take care and be stewards of these avenues, as it were, these streets, these roads, because they provide us really with the lifeblood to get around our towns and cities. We made reference to European models as well. If you look at Copenhagen, an incredibly complex street pattern of tightly woven streets, indeed not unlike we have in cities across the UK and beyond. And of course, in streets like Copenhagen, they provide the lifeblood and indeed the activity, vitality of place. So this notion of streets and not roads, just let me explain this just briefly with some examples. Of course, Edinburgh Newtown, when these streets were planned, particularly in the 18th century, very wide roads, which of course long predate car, horse-drawn cart, etc., etc. So generous widths were provided, assuming very much two-way traffic and shared space, which is a term, of course, which came much later. Manual for Streets is government DFT documentation, which probably about 9 years ago really started to push the need for decluttering and de-engineering streets and creating streets as places rather than simply places to get from A to B. In terms of the hierarchy, I think what we very much were in the past, particularly if you look at motorway construction, road construction in the 1950s and 60s, right through the 1970s, that's where we were, and this is very much where we want to be, going from basically movement, getting around, to creating places. So these are just some words that help perhaps to describe that. Boulevards, avenues, streets, and lanes, which are more place-based than expressways, distributors, etc. So roads can have this nasty habit of, in fact, dividing us. So if you look at a road like this, very, very wide lanes, verges, cycle. There's no obvious cycle paths here, so they create incredibly wide, almost canyon-like effect. And of course, we need all of these facilities, including the lighting, to be safe, etc. But we don't necessarily need them in this kind of arrangement. There are other ways of doing it, such as this through towns, where the vehicle traffic and parking, etc., together with the pedestrian footways, it creates this friction. By that I mean positive friction, where you can stop and associate with others. And of course, you can go between extremes, from something like in Abu Dhabi, where it's incredibly vehicle dominated, and indeed, of course, by the buildings and the level of enclosure as well, to something like what you see in Paris, which is not a million miles perhaps from what you have here, much taller buildings clearly, but much better integrated landscape within. Look at the widths of these with these boulevards. very, very wide, but of course incredible places to be, historic places as well. And we need to think in terms of a human scale. Nottingham's a really good example of where this roundabout here on the left, called Maid Marian Way, was transformed, hugely transformative for the centre area of Nottingham, into something far more inviting than these cycle pedestrian tunnels underneath there. And this is what you have today. It's a few years old now, but it's been a very successful scheme for Nottingham, very well integrated landscape and hardscape. This is part of Birmingham, which of course manifestly shows concrete underpass and bridge over it, and this is what we have today. A much, much more sort of welcoming scheme, particularly in terms of landscape. Taunton, of course, in Somerset is a relatively small town, but I think has got the balance of public realm and landscape and movement right. Of course, much less traffic in many ways, but very good precedent for high quality materials and ease of movement for all modes, not just for pedestrians and cyclists. So in terms of new development, if you look at, say, Upton, Northampton, one of the sort of stars really of what the HCA brought forward some years ago, very careful balance of landscape, street trees, boulevards, all integrated to placemaking. Equally, say in Newark, where we've got existing roads, much perhaps like our Hills Road, the creation and retention of trees and integration of cycles and pedestrians as well. Oxford's, of course, perhaps a good comparison, or not, with Cambridge, where, of course, some of the cycle facilities are less than we would like, but certainly they have preserved quite well the landscape in some of the arterial roads into and out of the centre of Oxford. Of course, one of the key aspects is making room for trees, and I'll speak in a few minutes about the best ways of doing that, because in fact, a lot of it's about what happens underground, not necessarily above ground. So some good examples of greening of streets. Again, this is back to Upton, where you have this very generous swale to deal with stormwater management from an existing development here, a new development, pardon me. And of course, we have examples like this just outside the window really here with Hobson's Conduit, and a lovely example of how you can colour that up. London, of course, has many good examples, of course, highly urbanised in terms of when you look at Kensington, and very transformative, well-known project for Kensington to try and create much better pedestrian crossings of the high street, but also integrate trees and landscape. So highly successful scheme. One, of course, another's on the Strand, where you've got much different characteristics, much taller buildings, much denser, perhaps much less sophisticated, but equally a good integration of bus lanes and cars. This is an example that Andrew spoke of, the New Malden, which attempted to develop a really interesting palette of both lighting and hardscape, but then came along and had to sort of add the double yellows and all the various different paints, etc., to, in effect, perhaps post-highways audit that had to provide this. So a good attempt with perhaps poor detailing of what it was trying to do in this town in Germany. So in some ways, less is actually more when it comes to detail. Copenhagen again, tight street environment, but transformation, really trying to get bus, cycling and, of course, lanes within a highly urbanized environment. Same in Stockholm, much narrower cycle lane, but as you can see, very much a green street in the heart of Stockholm as well. This is Rome, of course, challenge for space and the number of car drives in Rome, absolutely astonishing, but it manages to work in some ways, and of course in this case segregated in several ways. Sharing the street, we have some really good examples in the UK, and I'm not standing here, Chair, in front of you advocating necessarily shared space. It's really about equality in the public realm, and of course the Poundbury, very good example of how that was done. Ashford, this is part of the Ring Road project, which is connected to, of course, a lot of the work which was done for the International Rail project, but created a really interesting, just part of the Ring Road, shared space within Ashford, and has undone a lot of the highly over-engineered parts of Ashford previously. And of course, as you can see, this works quite well. Of course, vehicle speeds are highly reduced, but works much better. Poynton is a very good example. This is in East Cheshire, where we had a highly dominated street environment, particularly for cars and heavy goods vehicles and so on. And we're certainly taking some clues with this potentially for Mitcham's Corner, which of course we're looking at together at the bottom end of Milton Road. And this is how it was basically undone, creating courtesy crossways, but improving the landscape considerably at the same time. So Poynton is a very good example. I think there's a very good video of this as well online. Just to finish, Jared, with some of the details, some of the crucial things, of course, are to be mindful of infrastructure and to be mindful, of course, of all the various different requirements for users in terms of lane width. And of course, we need to go through each and every one in each and every case. There is no one size fits all. Of course, this has to be based on very much the evidence that we have. But if you took a typical cross section, and indeed this is one I presented again before Christmas at the Assembly, of a 20-meter right of way, so take that as your cross section, different ways of looking at it. So one way might be trees on one side, and of course that does create a slight compression of the lane width for, in particular, cyclists in this case, but possibly pedestrians. Trees on both ways, tree-lined street with bus lane in one direction as one option. And then another one being a tree-lined street with two-way cycle lane, 3 meters in that case, and a bus lane in one direction. But you can start to see how that starts to manifest itself in a number of different ways, and all, Chair, to discuss and to work through. And then lastly, one which is a little more combined, but in this case, you still have opportunities for landscape. One of the key things, of course, to create that landscape, whether trees are retained or the new trees, landscape are added, is to look at the soil composition. And this is a term I'm going to refer to as structural soil, and this has been used successfully in many projects in this country, and particularly in the United States, where you look at a network really of soil particles and stone that compact but can work very well with underground utilities, and this is really the zone for structural soil. And this is possible in very constrained, tight environments where you have very much hard surfaces on both sides. Trees can survive and do indeed thrive, because the crucial thing here is to get water to the tree and ensure that you've got enough room for the canopy spread of the tree. Another method is called Silvacell. This is a product now used in many parts of the United States and beyond, where you actually have a cell to which the tree is planted in an environment around the cell, but the structure, the strength of this cell, as it were, is extremely strong, can withstand the structural loads of buses and other type of vehicles, heavy goods vehicles, and they would sit in and around a tree, but also crucially protect it and allow its root system to penetrate in and through the vertical parts of the cell. So this is what it looks like. Here's a scheme we did on Riverside in Cambridge, where we redid part of the Riverside, just indeed you'll see in a second the Newmarket Road Bridge, where these were planted, and indeed we had existing utilities to deal with at the same time, and this is what it became. And the trees, of course, are relatively small, but from my understanding, they're doing quite well. So in summary, Chair, the crucial things are we have choices to make, and striking the right balance is the key between both movement, the needs for movement, but also the need for street and making places. A lot of investigation is required, of course, which officers are looking at, and we need to respond very much to context. So the summary, City Deal is a great opportunity to combine these things, not necessarily choose one or the other. Happy to take questions, Chair, on the details of the brief, but perhaps I think we'll be as officers. So over to you.
Thanks, Mr. Richardson, and thanks also for you and your team's contributions to these projects. Further contributions you make going forward. Are there any questions from the board on the presentation? No? Okay. Well, in terms of the Assembly's put forward an amendment as part of the broader document on the call for evidence. Is that what I mean, I'm happy to propose to the board that we support the principle of an environmental design guide, but I think the importance, as you said, Councillor Bick, is that this is available soon rather than as a long document. I mean, I can remember a couple of policy documents in this building which took the length of time that they lasted. They arrived after the train had left the station. So I think if we can take it that it's an environmental design guide, which is a statement of environmental principles for city deal projects, and that it is widely shared, then I would like to recommend that to the board. Are we happy with that? I think it makes explicit what would probably, well, what was planned anyway, but it just underlines the commitment. And as in your final series of slides, clearly there is going to be choices on several of the roads as to what is the right balance between the transport needs and the environment. So it's striking that balance. So effectively, if we could ask for that to be reported back to both the Assembly and the Board in terms of what those principles should consist of. Okay? Are we agreed on that? Yes. Okay. All right. Well, thank you on that. So if we effectively have addressed the issue of being more publicly clear about our commitments on design. If we could then move on to 2B, the call for evidence. And perhaps if I could ask Mr. Hughes if your team could just make a few, Mr. Smith could just open up there and give a summary for the board on the responses, which most of us attended a proportion of the evidence, and so if you could give us a summary, and then Councillor Bick could just update the response from the Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Chair. The report in front of you sets out the initial summary of the responses to the call for evidence. Apologies, the microphone is trying to get away from me. I won't go through the recommendations because I think Councillor Bick will cover the amendments when he comments, but the recommendations are set out in paragraph 2 and as amended or suggested to be amended by the board also in paragraph 2. The call for evidence had 3 hearing sessions and gave people the opportunity to provide written evidence which would be summarised in a paper to the board if submitted before the end of November last year, or if submitted after, it would still be taken into account in all the technical work. It will be published on the website as soon as possible, but due to the drafting deadlines for the papers would not be included in the initial summary of the evidence. Table 1 on the 3rd page of the report details that there were 77 discrete separate submissions, or 77 submissions made either verbally or in person, or verbally or written submissions made to the call for evidence before the 30th of November, and a further 7 submissions have been made in the period to the end of December. We did give a little bit of slack to 1 or 2 correspondents who actually received very early in January. Those 7 responses are now up on the website as well. Okay. The summary, in terms of the summary of the initial summary of main themes raised is detailed in Appendix 1 and then in more detail in Appendix 2. Appendix 1 summarises in numerical values how many submissions are made on each of a range of themes. Demand management and fiscal measures focusing on a number of submissions focusing on limiting access to the city centre, selective road closures, quite a number on parking controls, quite a number on road pricing, including congestion charging. Various options for that were suggested in the call. More detail in Appendix 2 again, but further analysis will be undertaken. a reasonable amount of commentary on technology, smart traffic management, data collection, smart ticketing, quite a lot on public transport, more attractive journeys, quite a lot on infrastructure improvements for active modes, walking and cycling, enhanced cycle networks in the city itself and in the rural networks that feed into the city. A reasonable amount on highway capacity, junction improvements within the city, measures aimed at traffic flow improvements. And obviously Mr Hughes has already provided some commentary on the balance that we need to strike there. Also some comments on asking for new roads to be considered, particularly looking at the east and south of the city. And then, finally, in terms of in terms of Appendix 1, it's quite a lot on behavioural change, tackling school and sixth form traffic as a particular focus, but also on last mile delivery, and also a fair bit of, concern and commentary on peak hour spreading and the tendency of the peak periods to get longer in time as traffic grows and the city grows. I'm not sure I want to take up too much more of your time, so I think I will leave it there, but obviously happy to take any questions.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to record the board's thanks to all of the people who did give evidence, and the time also that the board and assembly members and other observers gave to considering it and the questioning that took place. So we've got a set of recommendations in front of us. I don't know if there are any questions first. Councillor Bates.
Well, just some suggestions. I think on page 15, B, that's the third piece where it talks, has a word called "or" in it after traffic management. I think that word perhaps would be better, and take account obviously of the Cambridge Access study which we've got to come. So I think that just needs to reflect maybe that change. And obviously for C also the data understanding has come forward which came out at the Assembly meeting, so that needs to just reflect the new date. With those amendments, I think it's just tidying up amendments really, Mr Chairman.
Councillor Big, do you want to add anything? Because obviously what we want to, I think the board is will be happy to carry over the amendments that you proposed on page 14. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, just four things that I wanted to run through. We did, having participated in the call for evidence, which had been focused originally on the demand management and fiscal measures area of the city deal. That obviously delivered a lot more as well. But we did talk about whether members of the Assembly were willing to share their early reactions, early learnings from what they had heard through that process. And although some members weren't ready to do that yet, I do think it's my role to share those points that were made at this early stage of the process. And I'll do that. And these were points made by individual members of the Assembly, and so I'll give that caution that goes with that. Firstly, there was a note of concern that additional costs imposed on businesses might work in contradiction to other aims of the city deal for the economic well-being of the area. There was a view that if a form of road pricing was to be taken further, the question of fairness between those living within the city and outside it, travelling into it, would need to be addressed. There was a judgment from someone that although not enough information was available at this stage to form a final view, it was important to take sensible decisions at an early stage to avoid wasting time on chasing options that could be dismissed as not realistic earlier on. An observation that congestion charging did not have to be the same model as used in London, and could, for example, be applied at peak times in the mornings and evenings. Another comment that the income from a congestion charge would enable the city deal to provide much better quality and frequency of public transport, both in the city and beyond. One member wanted to make special note that they had become aware that there was interest in Cambridge for further parking controls to be examined as a means of demand management. And someone else said it was possible to make clear that the revenue gained from road pricing or a congestion charge would be used, if it was known that it was going to would subsidise buses, then they thought people might be more open-minded about it, as it would seem less like a penalty from an overall perspective. And the idea that any congestion charge could be applied to cyclists was not supported by members, and that was a collective view, I believe. A view that a tax on tourist coaches or buses coming into the city might provide a significant revenue stream, which would be helpful. I think there are other doubts about whether we have the powers to do that. That there are, in the opinion of one or two, significant practical problems with introducing a system such as gating or queue redistribution, and they would need to be part of considering that idea if it was taken further. So that was a range of views, and I do think that the Assembly is there to share those sort of comments with the board, and that's why I took the time to go through them. As you've hinted, one of our questioners asked why there wasn't a criteria in the recommendation in the officer's report which addressed environment and design, and that is the source of our amendment to recommendation 2, where we're inviting you to agree to the recommendation subject to the inclusion of an additional criterion to assess environmental impact and design. It really sits the other side of that issue about a design guide. I think they're very closely linked. In terms of keeping the debate going that was set in motion by the call for evidence, it was the feeling of many members that was something that we should be trying to do, although there's perhaps not much danger of it dying right now. We received an offer which I conveyed to you from Claire Ruskin and the Cambridge Network, who said she would be more than willing to host events where these ideas could be publicly discussed further. And then the question of demand management, and Robin Pellew has spoken about aspects of this earlier in your meeting, but we did talk in our meeting about the whole question of where demand management sat, if at all, in the strategy of the city deal. And in the eyes of many of our questioners, and I suspect the public beyond, it seems quite important that people understand what is in store in this area of demand management, in the sense that people feel that it does have an impact on what is required in changing the infrastructure on roads, if they know that at the same time there is going to be a management regime which will deter cars from entering the city and try and create road space that way, as well as just by extending concrete. And I think we understood from officers that demand management has always been considered as part of the city deal strategy and the county's transport strategies before that. But the board itself has been quite quiet about whether they accept that demand management is part of the strategy. And of course there is a whole debate, which the call for evidence what was directed at, which is, if you have a demand management strategy, what should it be? And I think there's a process now to try and work that out. But I think it is a fair question at this stage. If I could ask the board, do you agree that demand management is part of your strategy? Are you looking for the right tool? Is it only a question of selecting it? Because that will actually colour people's reactions, I think, to the proposals that are made about the radial routes that are going on now. It would be great if I could take away your response on that.
I take your last point. I don't see it in the report from the Assembly, but I take your point that there needs to be a follow-up. If I could just make an initial response. I mean, if we refer on pages 20 and 21, we have arguably a very good categorisation of the range of elements. And effectively, I think that in conjunction with wider public discussion and also detailed review by the Assembly, it's right that we ask our officers, effectively the board asks the officers, because we're the executive, to bring forward a set of proposals, and we also take up the point that you made there, Councillor Bitt, that sensible decisions need to be taken at an early stage. Now, one person's sensible decisions would be not the next person's, but what I think, what I want to propose is effectively a further recommendation, which is, it doesn't actually directly answer your question, but it will in terms of bringing forward a report at an early stage, and it will be minuted as well, subject to it being agreed by the board. So it's a recommendation, Ian, in addition to accepting the suggestions that you put forward, that the City Deal Officer team bring forward plans for an early citywide and city centre package of congestion cutting measures informed by the call for evidence, covering each of the categories, or each of the elements as I call it in table 2, as well as continuing investigation on other options. So whilst not wanting to shut off some options that might take longer, to bring forward a report to which becomes the report to the board's June meeting, that I cannot remember your dates, so it may be late May for the Assembly meeting, and that be the vehicle for us to take this forward. As in the earlier discussion in the meeting, it has always been the board's view that we have to combine interventions that are citywide, including that will influence and reduce the proportion of people travelling in by car at the peak times, with the projects that are underway. And it's important that those are available at a time, as Mr. Hughes answered earlier on, at a time before we actually make final decisions about some of the detailed schemes. So that's the proposal I would want to add. And finally, just to say, in relation to the point that you made about environmental assessment, I also, without again going overboard in terms of nth detail, I read that point as being also the ability, when we do come forward with these proposals, to also include some assessment of the net environmental impact, so that if we come forward with a set of proposals, obviously they need to be deliverable, they need to be fair, they need to be affordable, but we need to, I would ask as part of that, in following up your point, that when we come forward with those, that they are measured against what would be the environmental impact of a couple of other options, and particularly the environmental impact of not undertaking some citywide interventions as part of the package. So I've just put that as a structure, and I'll invite Mr. Bridge to contribute.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I understand the question, but I think it really is too early for the board to rule anything in or rule anything out, that we actually need the officers to do the work and provide us with the additional information. And then, at the appropriate time when we have that,
which would be in June,
is the time when we can decide what we can rule in and what we can rule out. But I think it's very premature to try and do that at the moment, because actually we don't have sufficient information to make that decision.
Okay. Any other members of the board want to contribute? Councillor Manning.
Thank you, Chairman. I tend to regard most of what we're doing at the moment as being a problem for Cambridge City, in as much as the design guide and things like this. The City Deal is actually a partnership between South Cambridgeshire and Cambridge City. We have been concentrating on Cambridge City because we decided at an early stage that that was the first place to look at. The city deal is to deliver more housing and more jobs. There's no money for anything else. Now, if we can do nice-to-do projects on the way at the same time, that is a bonus. But our money is there to produce more jobs and more houses. And we shouldn't lose sight of that fact, and we should not lose sight of the fact that it is capital. It can only be spent on projects. It cannot be spent on day-to-day revenue. And, for example, I personally would like to subsidise park and ride or subsidise buses. We cannot do that with the money. It's not allowed. Councillor Beck has mentioned a congestion charge, which is something that I think I have. We believe in South Cambs that there has to be demand management. There has to be. You cannot go on with the present way. However, there are a great number of people who would prefer to sit in their cars every day listening to their CD players rather than either get out and walk or cycle. On Monday I shall be catching the train again. I shall take the guided bus to the station, and on the way home, because it's late at night, there won't actually be a guided bus. So I shall walk from the station to Drummer Street. It's not very far. Cambridge is a very compact city, and anybody can make that decision at the moment. They don't have to get in a car, they don't even have to get their bike out the rack. It's not very far to walk from the centre of Cambridge to the rail station or anywhere else. So, I think we've got to remember that a lot of people are choosing not to make or walk. They're deliberately preferring to spend an hour sitting or half an hour sitting in a traffic jam. As to a congestion charge, there was a notice of motion passed by South Cambridgeshire District Council in 2009. This council believes that the proposal of a congestion charge or workplace parking charges would be against the best interests of the residents of South Cambridgeshire. Any form of charging would be unfair to those who travel into Cambridge compared to those who live in the city, and could lead to a loss of employment and the closure of shops and other businesses. We believe that improvements to public transport should be made and given time to work before any form of congestion charging is considered. Now, that is still the official policy of South Cambridgeshire District Council. We have talked about putting forward a new notice of motion in light of what's been going on. But Councillor Beck today has mentioned on several occasions a congestion charge, which I didn't actually think was part of the report, but I felt that it was time that I made our position exactly clear on this. And I'm sorry, but we will support demand management, we will support road closures, we will support anything in those lines, but we will not support fiscal measures until other measures have been tried and tested.
Councillor Bates.
Thank you. Can I start by, I attended the assembly, so I listened to the discussion. Two comments really. I think the first actually is about some principles, and that's the word I would use, principles in respect to design. There is very good guidance out there nationally and in other authorities to inform that. So I would definitely be using the word design principles, and I think that would satisfy the debate which happened at the assembly. We have on page 20 and 21 6 themes, suggestions, which are fairly extensive, from behaviour changes, highway capacities, infrastructure, public transport and technology. Those need to be further in detail discussed. Officers need to go away, as John Bridge has indicated, and therefore I would support that sort of recommendation that all of those 6 are part of those discussions, not one of the 6, and therefore they need all to be taken into account, because there may be a solution here and a solution there which will be very different for both Cambridge City and South Cambs.
Okay, well, I mean, I take that, and that was why in my background to the proposed extra recommendation said that it would need to have elements of all of those 6 if it was going to come up with a sufficiently robust combination of measures that would minimise the additional car movements and would actually help help the other measures and reduce the pressure on the radial routes because of the citywide measures proposed. So, but what we do need to do, therefore, is just effectively put that back to our officers in light of the evidence that we've got and ask the officers to bring forward a report, which will first go to the Assembly. And at that stage, we can debate some of the options, and we can have, as Councillor Manning has expressed, there are some strong views of different parties, and we can seek to address some of that as well. So, taking account of the fact that so I'm taking account of the changes that Councillor Bates made, along with that additional and, I think, in addition to the two changes on page 14 that are in bold, and then have you got the wording that I wrote out, that I read out? So effectively, asking officers to come back with an early report with some specific proposals in June. Are those recommendations agreed by the board?
Yeah.
Okay, agreed. Thank you. So we move forward, and thank you for your input there, Councillor Bick, on behalf of the Assembly. I know that the Assembly looked at that, and I reiterate the value and the resource that we have in the responses, because what we have are responses that are both current and firstly a number of responses that are directly about Cambridge and others that reference locations in Britain and elsewhere where we can directly look at how we can apply that to Cambridge. So it will be tested when we come back with a set of proposals, which the Assembly will see first. So thank you for that, and then if I can move on to the next item, which is the workstream update. Tanya, do you want to add anything to the report, which is item 7?
The one thing I will say is that I met with the director of the Cambridge Promotions Agency and with Claire Buskin last week, and Claire would be willing to update on how the Cambridge Promotions Agency has done against its 2015 deliverables at the February Assembly of March 14.
Okay. So we've got a programme, and we now also, I think we've also, we're looking also hopeful to achieve the appointment of a communications manager in the near future as well. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Any questions or comments on item 7? Okay, so we can note the report. And then item 8 is the programme, which also effectively is the programme for the Assembly for the coming meetings. So we've got the report back on, initial report back on Madingley Road on the 3rd of March, but I think that's still subject to a further and fuller report. Mr. Hughes, just so that I just think we have to be clear to people, including in the west of the city, what that's going to cover and what's coming in September.
Yes, Chairman, that'll be an update.
So it's an update, and then the
more substantive recommendations will be later in the year.
Okay, so the preferred option report. So it isn't a preferred option report, that comes in September.
That's correct, Chairman. Yes.
Okay. And then we've got the feedback on the Chisholm Trail consultation, and we've got the first look at the A1307 corridor in March as well. Yeah?
Correct, Chairman, yes.
And then that means that those items are also your business, Councillor Bick, in February. Yeah? And then also that with one of the key issues also is the budget setting report, because we've had various announcements, including on new homes bonus, which we need to take account of in planning the budget. Essentially, what we're looking to do there is at least have an outline budget running towards 2020 and make some choices about how we use the additional funds that we have out of the home bonus, which we've been using for projects that are not part of the core city deal, but which may help bring forward other initiatives, including the initiatives that we've just been talking about in terms of citywide work. Okay, so I just wanted to review what's coming forward, particularly in March, and then in June we've got Histon Road, Milton Road report backs. So here it says selection of preferred measures, so there'll be a reasonable level of detail in those on both of the two schemes.
Yes, that's correct.
In terms of I'm just talking about process. I underline the fact that there's absolutely no decisions being taken, and that there's obviously a consultation underway that we will be listening to at exhibitions and also at the meeting, for instance, that the North Area Committee is facilitating. Okay, and other meetings that residents are organising, and also in June we'll have the report that we've just discussed, skills, housing. Yes, that's quite an agenda. So then we've got other things as in this list for each of the meetings through to the end of 2016. Any questions or comments on the forward programme? Okay. All right, and thanks for that. That gives us a clear programme for the year. Obviously, it would be good, given the amount of preparation work, if over the later part of the year, particularly perhaps on the cycling, some of the cycling projects, we can start to actually see some improvements on the ground. So, thank you for your contributions, and thank you for the public questions and input. That concludes our agenda for this afternoon, and I look forward to seeing people at the next meeting. Thank you.